Ernest Ellender, welcome to the show. How are you this morning?
Very well. Excited. Excited to get started. First podcast, so I appreciate you giving me this opportunity to speak to your audience.
No, you are more than welcome. I am very excited to dive in. I'm surprised you haven't been on podcasts yet, but I have a good feeling that it's not going to be your last one. So, given the fact that the world might not know too much about you if they've not come across you on a podcast before, can you give us a little insight into who you are and what it is that you do?
Ernest Ellender from South Louisiana, just about a little bit south of New Orleans. And let's see, I got into psychology. I always wanted to make a living by helping people, as my parents did before me. So that's what got me into psychology. So that's one main thing that I do, psychology. Now I do life coaching. The second thing, while I was out there in California learning all about clinical psychology, I got into martial arts. Did a lot of Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, got my black belt, came back and started a Jiu Jitsu school also. And now, most recently, just 2 months ago, published my first book on this topic.
I love that. Plenty of diverse and different things that you're doing at this moment in time. And I want to get started with the psychology background. You mentioned that your parents were helping people before. Were they psychologists?
My dad was an orthodontist, and then my mom just worked. She had the opportunity to work in a lot of like charity organizations. It was just very civic-minded, always very intentional in contributing to the community. My grandfather was a medical doctor, and at one point he and one other doctor, his cousin, were the only two doctors in Homa. So servicing a large area. So there's just a long family focus on civic-oriented, occupations.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously that took you down the route of psychology. And what was your first encounter with that when you were younger? It's not something I should say that people, when they're growing up, they're 5, 6 years old, maybe a fireman, astronaut, and all those other things are on the agenda, but it's not usually psychologists. Maybe it isn't, I don't know, this day and age that we're in, but talk to me about your first encounter, because I'm sure it wasn't the dream job as a 6, 7-year-old.
No, at all. When I came back from, I went to 1 year up in Boston College, and I didn't fit in there very well. I came back home, and I just had some emotional difficulty. I was a little short temper, anger, and everything. And my mom was like, "You don't need to talk to us, but you got to talk to somebody. Handle that short temper." Somehow it developed, and so I went to this local psychologist here, and talking to him, I didn't realize. I said, "This is a real job. You sit here and talk to people and help them." I said, "Let me look into this. It looks like a lot of fun. It looks awesome, So that was just going to see somebody at, I guess, 18 or 19 years old, introduced me to that. And then later on in college, I went and worked at some inpatient facilities to see if that was the right fit for me. And where a lot of people were saying, they don't like this, it's really weird and rough and working with crazy people or whatever, it was just so comfortable to me. I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed interacting with people in that kind of one-on-one or small group settings. It just really suited me.
Yeah, absolutely. And it sounds like your first encounter with psychology as a patient was pretty positive as well. It's interesting. A lot of people who maybe were told to go in that direction, right? You were a teenager and it was about your temper. So maybe not two things that were the most enjoyable to go and talk to someone about, but it seems like you had a pretty positive experience with your psychologist.
Very much so. I still see him around town today. We have a wonderful, now I became, what was it, about 12, 15 years later, I became a psychologist. So he was the first to kind of welcome me into town and show me the ropes of that field here. It was really neat.
Amazing. And what did you get out of it? Did you work on some of those challenges? Was this your first insight into talking about some of the situations that you had gone through, right? Obviously, the book that you've recently written is all about painful childhoods. And I can imagine that maybe something along those lines came up in the conversations that you were having with your psychologist.
When I say this is how we heal from painful childhoods, a lot of people assume that I kind of had a really rough or painful childhood. And I had these memories of my childhood as being nothing's perfect. We have a lot of substance abuse in my family, addiction stuff, but I had a happy childhood. But while I was working on this curriculum and practicing the rules, I recognized how much they applied to me also. So it's, at the time, I guess it would be considered kind of run-of-the-mill teenage angst, some frustration with myself about not doing well in Boston College. I was feeling down on myself. So a little, just kind of run-of-the-mill teenage angst. And he had a relaxed style of just talking about things and just being able talk with somebody about it and put my finger on what's the anxiety. Well, yeah, I feel bad about not doing well up into this fancy school. And what does that mean about me? So it was...
Yeah, so it came from some teenage challenges, obviously triggered by that circumstance in Boston as well. And prior to that, did you have anyone that you talked to about the challenges that you went through? You know, some of the things that, you know, like you said, these things don't always need to be major per se, but you know, we go through our common challenges when we're younger, when we're teenagers, in our early adult life and beyond as well. So did you have anyone that you spoke to before that, or was the psychologist the first person you kind of spoke to openly about those challenges that you had?
That was the first person outside of my friends and family. And I got to say, I mean, had been absolutely fortunate. It's kind of like after I'm meeting so many clients who came from these really rough backgrounds, I just have become more and more grateful over the years that in spite of the issues that we do have in our family, I had parents who were very open. I had my mom who was just always willing to communicate with us, talk with us about stuff, some stuff that you don't talk about with your mom. I happen to have two very, very good friends growing up. So I had deep relationships with people. And again, we all run into issues, but I had these deep relationships. And that's when working with people who did not have those things. That contrast, I recognize how difficult a lot of people do have it. And that's what led to this interest in how do we learn how to develop deep relationships, stable relationships, and positive relationships with ourselves. So kind of having a lot of those components, not all of it, but having a lot of those wonderful components kind of led me to want to share that. I say part of our family issue, part of my kind of trickle down of any family stuff would fall into that in the addiction realm as like codependent or people pleasing, that kind of perfectionistic people pleasing. So that would be more of my issue of seeing a lot of positivity in other people and being a little bit naive and wanting to serve. So we can get into those kind of problems like when we do that too much. If you do everything for somebody else, then they don't learn how to do it themselves. And so we get into this overindulging thing. That's one of the book chapters is overindulgent dynamics are bad. And in practicing these rules, I recognized how much I was doing that.
I can imagine probably a lot of the psychology work that you did was potentially starting to mirror, right? In the same sense as well. I find that a lot when we start to open up or when we start to do the work that we do, and eventually we start to see, you know, things reflected back at us that maybe we haven't faced before. Was that your experience with psychology and working with clients before? You're like, wow, I did not realize that I also went through this, right?
Constantly. That, in fact, very related to this, to our topic today, is, with anxiety. In school we were taught, how to teach controlled breathing and muscle relaxation, how to get out of this sympathetic nervous system response to danger, the fight, flight, or freeze response. So anxiety, everybody experiences anxiety. It's natural, it's on the regular. But some people really struggle with getting out of that state of anxiety. So we practice teaching people. And in the beginning, it was so boring to me. I did not enjoy sitting there for an hour doing controlled breathing, muscle relaxation. It's just, I wanted to get to the cognitive stuff. How are they thinking? How can they improve their thinking? Finding these these really challenging, I thought, higher level things. About 6 months into working with the clients every week, doing at least a couple of hours tutorials like this, I started realizing how anxious I was. I just didn't know. All the pressure of school for so many years, I was very perfectionistic, very hard on myself for just, why didn't I get the 99 or 100 instead of a 92 or something? I kind of always wanted to get it just right. And by the end of the year, I was really getting into it. And that kind of started the process of me getting more and more into helping people get out of that chronic state of anxiety.
Yeah, I have a similar story of anxiety in the sense that when people used to say I'm anxious, I didn't really understand what they meant. I was like, I don't really get it. But then obviously as time goes on and you realize anxiety doesn't only come in the form of, someone like frightened to do anything, or like it goes into like kind of a bit of a panic attack, and you don't assume it's only that, or it's, someone who can't step up on a stage or do public speaking or whatever that might be. And you realize it kind of takes many different forms, which you notice yourself in the sense of like, why is it not 99 and it's 92% or whatever that might be? It really starts to become quite enlightening enlightening. So yeah, I can definitely resonate with that as well. And then obviously you've now made a transition into life coaching. What is the reason behind going away from psychology and moving towards life coaching? Or are they kind of quite similar in the approach that you take? From my understanding, they're worlds apart in a way, kind of very similar concept, but very different in the approach. But you can obviously tell me more about that.
There are a number of things very attractive about the life coaching, and some of it's very more functional in America when you have to deal with insurance and all this whole system. They just make it very difficult. So once you've established yourself sufficiently and you can move into direct pay and stuff like that, that's much nicer. It's much more pleasant. 1/3 the paperwork, etc. Okay, so that's one. Number two, especially with the us getting into the online stuff, it enables me to reach an audience that is looking for my specialty. All right, and when you're still doing through psychology, it's very difficult to do interstate and international stuff. It's just ridiculous how difficult it is, right? So with life coaching, there's not that that challenge is not there. Just make it a lot easier. It's a lot easier. So if in other words, if I'm just seeing people as psychologists here in town, then I get a lot of general people who come in just for a lot of broad range of things. But what I've really developed, what I really enjoy, is helping people who have experienced a lot of childhood stuff that makes it difficult for them. So it's a specialty. So instead of doing general work, I really am looking forward to doing more and more of this, focusing on this topic, where I think where I have more to offer people. It's difficult to find people who are specialize in this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's something that's coming up more and more and relating to people more and more as well. And I think that when people go into a certain field and they become specialists in an area, I think that that's almost far better than someone being a generalist. I think we have a lot of generalists, so it's always nice to get someone who's kind of an expert on the subject matter and who wants to dive deep into that. And of course, the subject matter that you recently wrote a book about was childhood, painful childhoods, right? And you literally have on the title of your book, like how to heal from a painful childhood, right? Exactly. So, I love the bold statement, and I love the fact that your title comes with an answer or like a tagline that shows that you're going to achieve that, versus sometimes it's questions, sometimes it's like a little bit more vague. But I love the fact that you made such a bold statement. Why did you go with that bold statement? Do you feel like the book really answers that question to the very core?
Yes, the focus was on a comprehensive approach to it. Okay, so a lot of books go into 2 or 3 or 4 of the different concepts. And when I was meeting with all these clients, so once I graduated and I started seeing all these clients at the counseling center, Nichols at the local college counseling center for a few years, I got to see my own clients over long periods of time. And when I started meeting these clients who had these just backgrounds that were so incomprehensible to me, from really rough, like being raised in these cults and really rough stuff. And when somebody came in with that amount of trauma in one family or one community, I said, well, how is it possible that one family can contain and maintain so much trauma between generations? And when I went to look in the literature and try to study this intergenerational trauma, a lot of it was focused on ethnic groups or cultural trauma, like the descendants of chattel American slavery or of Jewish descendants and these kind of cultural things. And I was more looking at the people in front of me, or these family members. So what are all the components in that family? And I couldn't find that. There were little bits and pieces all over, and some of the individual bits and pieces were described very well. But my goal is to have a comprehensive approach that is as trainable as possible, as learning. From my martial arts, I learned a lot of how do we learn best. And it's not getting super abstract and complex. The best we can do is come up with a very short 1 to 2 word or sentence guiding principle. So that's where the rules came in. I wanted to be, once you understand the rule, you comprehend all the narrative and concepts related to it, you can just remember the rule, and that rule is short and sweet. And then it pops up in your mind throughout the day, different rules. Like for this topic, the topic that you talk on all the time, that your podcast is about being healthy in your life, this would fall under practice treating yourself in a self-loving and self-respecting fashion. Well, how do we go about doing that? Well, we do that in an informed, mature, I can want to help somebody, but if I don't know how to, then it's hard for me to do so in a mature fashion, in an educated fashion. So when somebody wants to treat their body in a healthy fashion, and they don't know how to do that because they did not learn that in their family, or even worse, they learn the habits and the self-hatred that makes them injure their body. And now they've decided they want to do something different. They want to heal from this intergenerational trauma. Well, where do they go? One, they can listen to podcasts like yours where they just flood their ears daily with positive rewriting, with education, with all these guests who give very clear little golden nuggets to pick up and learn how better to love and treat our own bodies in a truly healthy fashion, not kind of instinctive or intuitive, because a lot of those instincts and intuition were poorly trained or brainwashed in a negative way.
And how important are those, I was going to say, how important are those early years in terms of the impact they have on us? Because from my understanding, they're incredibly impactful, right? Like they become kind of the DNA in a sense of the way that we then live our lives. So can you talk to us a little bit more about how impressionable we are as children and how, if we don't get the correct upbringing, it can be really detrimental for literally the remainder of our lives unless we intervene?
That is a huge question. That is a mouthful. I mean, you mentioned it is essentially the DNA. It is our DNA, our non-coding DNA does change according to our life's experiences. We used to, when I was young, they said DNA was just fixed. But now we know that DNA, non-coded DNA shifts depending on what happened in our lifetime, and we pass that down several generations. It's really fascinating. So your experiences literally change your DNA. They activate different DNA, and it's incredibly impactful. It's a really challenging topic to address because it's so foundational, and it impacts the body's development so much that it's really challenging. It's incredibly difficult in adulthood to make significant, lasting, fundamental positive changes. For example, when we get into some of the details of it, as a child is experiencing stress, and it doesn't have to be a lot of people think that it has to be a singular traumatic event like physical or sexual abuse or severe neglect. It doesn't have to be those scenarios. It can be ongoing stress, like parents who divorce and have kind of a nasty divorce and put the kids between it, legal battle for 3 years. Well, if a child is from 4 to 7 years old and they have this negativity and this stress of the parents separating, that's a prolonged period of time when that child is in a heightened anxiety state while the brain is developing. So while the brain develops, this kid who doesn't have that going on and the kid who has all this high stress in the household going on, their brains develop differently. So the brain structures that launch us into fight, flight, freeze mode, these survival responses, stays activated. So the neural pathways that get that machine going, that keep them active, it happens faster and it happens more intensely. So someone who is consistently raised in those environments, in adulthood, when they are triggered by something that touches on that nerve, and the body is a big one, when in the fitness realm, when something happens related to the body, they are they're more quick to jump into that fight, flight, freeze mode, the survival mode, and their experience of it is way more intense than someone who's not experienced those things. I like to think of it, and I explain it like we all have our natural human experiences, like a little bit of shame about our body, or embarrassment, or self-consciousness about our body. Well, once you've experienced prolonged periods of stress or traumatic experiences that involve the body, that basically ramps up these natural embarrassment, natural shame, pumps it up on steroids. I think it's like a massive, big, roided out, crazy strong. So the survival response isn't a little bit, it's quick and it's intense, and it stays, and it won't stop, and it just keeps going because the brain pathways are built up. So it's literally, that's why one of the terms is developmental PTSD, developmental post-traumatic stress disorder, because it literally, the brain and personality develops around that chronic state of sympathetic arousal, of nervous system arousal. You just can't get out of it. And so it's hugely impactful. So there's this chronic state of, that's in the body, the chronic state of arousal. And then there's also all these messages, these core beliefs and messaging that a child's brain creates in order to survive that world. In the book we call it traumalize. For example, if it's something bad happens to my body, then what do I need to do? I need to make my body extra strong or extra break it down in order to survive. What do I need to do? I need to serve a purpose. I need to do something to survive. And then I have beliefs about other people. People are not safe. People are not reliable. The people who are supposed to love you will not be there for you. So we have these traumalized, these bad messages that a child's brain came up with. And that kind of goes into the subconscious, but right barely under the subconscious, and is driving our behaviors. I have to be perfect. I have to be perfect to be loved. And if I'm caught being imperfect, that sympathetic nervous system goes wild, and I have intense emotional reactions to it. And it's just a recipe for real struggles in adulthood. So they call that complex PTSD, complex. It's not simple like adult, like if I go get in a car accident, I'll be scared to get in the car. That's kind of simple or non-complicated. But complex, when you're growing up, you counter all this, and then in adulthood, sometimes it doesn't make sense. You get into a little argument with your significant other, and you explode. You can't help it. You don't realize that something triggered the intense sympathy, that intense fight, flight, freeze response related to one of those thoughts in your brain. Oh, if I'm not perfect, this person's going to leave me. Really challenging.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's so deeply embedded, right? And that's the thing, like you said, it rewires the DNA. It's so deeply embedded into our systems that it's almost impossible not to respond in that way, because it's so kind of primitive in that sense. It's not even like a rational or logical response. It's just something that's so deeply within us that's the way that we respond. And a question I have off the back of this, because if you met me, I don't know, 20 years old, for example, and you asked me about my childhood, I would be like, yeah, things were, not always the easiest, but I had a good childhood, I'm doing fine, blah, 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 whatever, right? I had no idea. And interestingly enough, I didn't have that many childhood memories. Then I had an experience with hypnotherapy, which was incredibly insightful, unlocks a lot of my childhood memories. And all of a sudden I had a better insight into what that looked like compared to what I had beforehand. And I had no idea that a lot of the decisions I was making in my life, and as you said, those triggers that happen and you respond in a certain way, you don't really understand it, but you just think that's part of who you are. I would have never related that to anything that happened in my childhood, because like I said, if you met me at 20, I had no idea. I blocked it all out. I didn't really have any of those memories available to me. So with someone who might be in that situation today, or where I was, who have no idea, and they just think they're making decisions based on, maybe something that, and this is what I thought as well. I was like, it was just something that happened when I was a teenager or something along those lines. But that was just, kind of like you said, like the trauma lies. It's the narrative that's able to be reinforced based on some life situations that come up that reinforce that narrative that you created when you were, like you said, 3, 4, 5, 6 years old, right? I thought it was all down to those things, not anything to do with my very, very early years. So if you're someone like me who's completely oblivious to the fact that anything happened when you were at that age, how do you even begin to learn that, unless you're like fortunate like me that I was headed in the direction of hypnotherapy? Otherwise, maybe I'd still be clueless to this day.
Well, I'm curious, if you don't mind me asking, what led to that experience with the hypnotherapy?
I was not going through a great time, to be completely honest. My mental health took a hit, and it was kind of almost unexplainable. And, it was manifesting in many ways in which I knew wasn't right. And I fortunately told a trusted person at that time. He told me he was trying hypnotherapy and he really believed in it. Unfortunately, he led me in that direction and, ultimately changed the course of my life. But like I said, had I not reached out to him and he had not sent me in that direction, I don't really know what would have happened. So that was what pretty much got started with it.
Fantastic. And that, sometimes it just happenstance like that. I mean, I guess it somehow, hopefully people watching, it's a lifetime of education and insights, and kind of just looking for solutions, looking for education, looking for answers, right? It's really easy to get caught in the rat race of things, and most of my clients are coming in are usually in their 30s, because in the teens and the 20s, we're so just tough and bear it and running, and then by the 30s, it starts breaking down and say, okay, I need to do something, I need to figure something out. You can start with reading and try to read and try to self-figure it out. And I'm a big fan of at least trying some professional, like going to the professional. If I have legal problems, I'm going to go find an attorney. If I think I have something going on in the physical world that's training-wise, I might find a sporting coach to help get some insight into this issue. So it's, I guess, just urge for a very proactive approach to it. And oftentimes we don't have, a lot of people don't have the resources to be able to access these professionals. And very fortunate now, we have a tremendous amount of stuff on YouTube and on these online where we can go down these rabbit holes and research, at least get us into the ballpark of what we think might really be going on for us. It's a constant challenge of getting that information out to the people who could really benefit from it.
Yeah, and I guess the thing is that if something starts not to feel right, I would maybe, this sounds a bit crazy to say, but I would say to a lot of people, maybe assume it's your childhood, and better to be pleasantly surprised that it's not versus to assume that it's not, because I think that there's a higher likelihood, and like I think that you experienced in your career, that it probably was something to do with that versus anything else. And like I said, if it was anything else, amazing, like be pleasantly just surprised, but good chance of that. So would you kind of recommend the same thing? It's like, well, maybe explore that first.
Absolutely. Whether you're doing phenomenal, you're like, making $1 million a year, or doing terribly, it's been impacted by, the groundwork was laid in childhood. And so if you haven't explored that, both to address, problems that were created in childhood, and then also to build on strengths that were created in childhood, to recognize, oh, well, you had wonderful communication in your family. Well, that's tremendous. Let's build on that. Do some more communication training. You can be an absolute leader in that realm. So whether it's positives or negatives, we can look to the childhood and just find so much wonderful, rich stuff to work with. And you're right. So many times it takes 6 months into working with somebody before they kind of become more open to and start exploring the childhood stuff. And like, oh, okay, there is no avoiding it. Yeah, let's go get into it. And then it becomes this fascinating journey. There's oftentimes some fear of opening that can of worms sort of thing. And then once we get into it and kind of demystify it and destigmatize the discussion of uncomfortable topics, then it becomes really a fascinating journey into getting to know ourselves and how these different, like in the book, how these 20 different components. What was your family like on each of these different components? And how do you think that impacted you? It's a really fun self-discovery process, whether you experienced rough childhoods or not. And then understanding, once you have that understanding of it, you can see how other people's, that's a whole other thing. Once you've done that research on yourself and you understand how this impacted your life, then it's better for you to understand how your partner's childhood impacted them and what their struggles from childhood bring into the relationship. You're not angry at me. You're angry at your parents and taking it out on me. You can see it once you've really educated yourself enough and experimented enough with yourself to see the obvious and massive impacts of our childhood foundation on our adult functioning.
Yeah, I could not agree more. And I think that it makes for better relationships, and it also allows you to be more of a compassionate and empathetic human being, because you're then able to say, well, actually, like, I get it. Like, I get where they're coming from. Is like you said, you're not angry at me. You're angry because of, unfortunately, what I did might have triggered you. But me and my fiance, we have this conversation all the time. It's like, your trauma is not my responsibility, and my trauma is not your responsibility. Like, it's my responsibility not to trigger you, especially if I know that something does, and I'll do my very best to avoid, hitting on that string. But at the same time, if you explode off the back of that because you've not done the work and you haven't healed, then it's not to do with me. It's to do with what you need to sort yourself. And I have my responsibility and you have yours as well. But you then can be more empathetic. And like we said, we work around those things and we definitely don't, weaponize them like a lot of people do in arguments and stuff like that. So I think it really allows for a lot better relationships, friendships, and everything along those lines as well.
Look, developing empathy can be incredibly challenging, especially for someone who's experienced a lot of stuff that creates that chronic state of anxiety. Let's say somebody before 10 years old who developed a lot of this chronic stress, a lot of their adult functioning, their problem solving and interpersonal functioning is still on that somewhat delayed childlike response, kind of a me first out of a survival habit. So it's a me first, and this, like we said, the neural pathway ramped up on steroids. So you say something like, my partner says something that triggers me, my survival response mode is stronger than other people who didn't experience that stuff in childhood. So when my response is that more amped up, it's that much more difficult for me to calm down and listen. So it's more difficult to develop empathy. So the process to get there is we got to slow down, practice that breathing. We got to get good at breathing, got to get rid of it. And it's not just breathing, because people come in, I have yoga instructors who come in like, oh yeah, I do breathing all the time. No. No one has ever come in and been like an expert breather. It takes years to become an expert breather. An expert breather is someone who in the middle of a crazy situation or in the middle of an argument can breathe in the middle of a sentence and drop their emotional state down such that they know that they have something triggering going on and they're able to speak to it, say, hold on a second, I need just a moment. I'm feeling triggered, but I know that what you're saying is really important to you, and therefore it's really important to me. Like you said, it's not my responsibility to fix it for you, but it's my responsibility as a partner to be supportive of you. Not to fix it for you, do it for you. But it's my responsibility to be supportive of you. And to do that, I have to continue to develop my skill of calming myself down. Enough for me to be able to hear you, summarize back what you said, agree with the parts of it I agree, and then establish that common ground, and then I can give you the stuff I don't agree with. Just being able to do that with somebody who comes in raw, who's never worked on any kind of trauma stuff background, it usually takes a solid year to be able to develop that ability. Because their partner says something, and it's such a high-pressure cooking situation where their response is intense. And it's if they believe in their brain that if it's not resolved or if they're not right, then the partner's going to leave. It's almost like a life or death situation over who messed up doing the dishes or something, you know? It's very confusing. That's where the complex PTSD part comes in. It's very confusing sometimes. Why are you so mad? Got to breathe, slow down, relax, and really get into this. I got to calm down enough for us to explore it together and really try to understand, why is this bothering me so much? Why is this bothering you so much? It takes a long time to be able to develop that kind of healthy self-control to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. But what a powerful tool it will be. I'm sure it could resolve so many arguments that are inevitably going to end in a bad way with, egos going up and, triggers and all these traumas like coming to the surface. No one really exactly fears, and all these things that no one really understands. And it's happened, like you said, over the dishes or something really, really minuscule and confusing. And like you said, that's where the complex part comes into it. But imagine how powerful if someone could just be that anchor who could just slow things down and, like you said, breathe through it. So it's a really powerful tool. So let's not underestimate. I would say that anyone who would take that I would take that in 3 years, let alone trying to learn it for 1 year, however long it takes.
I thought I was getting pretty decent at it myself after about 2 years of working with clients. And sometimes I say, a year, because 2 to 3 years just sounds so intimidating to a lot of people. But the first year, you get so much progress, so where you can function on a level that you couldn't function before within relationships and whatnot. And if we keep on it, and if we really develop a lifestyle of self-focus and improvement and education and training, by the second and third year, it's amazing. And in recent years, I got into free diving, which is holding the breath underwater for long periods of time. I'm still amateur. I haven't broken. I'm almost broke the 4-minute mark, and that's like still amateur in free diving world. But it's just amazing. You go underwater, and the second I have any kind of momentary sense of fear, I almost have to go up. It's amazing how advanced we can get in the breath training. Years and years. You can do it forever. But it becomes fun once we get into the process of moving up that. Call it just moving up the scales, moving up the thriving scales, from just kind of surviving and getting by to really being up there and doing what we want to do and being very effective at achieving goals.
I couldn't agree more, because I think you said earlier, it's like some people are afraid to open that can of worms. But if you actually turn around the lens in which you look at it and you recognize that it is this massive self-discovery process, and if there's anything to learn in life, and a lot of us, who listen to podcasts, who read books, etc., we're learners. We want information. We want to understand the world around us a little bit better. So if there's any book that you should be reading, it's the book of yourself, right? And that's why you should be opening up this kind of worms and just looking at it from a different perspective. And I think another thing is recognizing that you're not the person who went through that trauma. Well, maybe you are, but you are definitely very, very different now than you were 20 years ago. So you're in a much better position to navigate that. Hopefully, like you recommended earlier, you've reached out to a help of a professional who can help you navigate that too. So, you're in a really solid position to do that. And one thing I wanted to ask, when it comes to these rules that you've got, I work in the health and fitness space, as you know, and a lot of these things come up, right? People who, tell me they love food too much and I just don't buy it. I'm like, there's no chance that you just love food or you just dislike exercise so much. It's impossible. It's like, we all love food, and, to a degree, most of us would prefer to be doing something different to exercise unless we find a form that we absolutely love. Like, that's kind of the universal principle. So when it comes to health and fitness, what are some of those things that come up, and what are some of the rules that you find the most valuable to applying for someone who's maybe having troubles with their weight, having troubles with maintaining a healthy routine, lifestyle, etc.?
Man, oh man. Right off, one of the chapters call it control. Control is good, especially good control. So, in childhood, when we don't feel like anyone's in control, and certainly not me. If I'm not in control of the childhood and there's terrible things happening or there's stress, then I look for ways to control the environment, control myself, control the environment. And when the parents aren't teaching us healthy ways to control it, well, we control this by eating these clean foods and by getting some strenuous or even light exercise. These are healthy ways of coping with, of gaining control over myself and my environment. Well, then, if I don't have that kind of instruction, that kind of guidance on proper and wonderful self-care, then my kid's brain develops these other ways of controlling. Well, if this isn't going, I can control my body, and I can do it. I can be very strict on it. I can hurt it. I can feed it what it wants. I am experiencing pain. Well, I want to experience pleasure. I experience a lot of pain, then I deserve to experience pleasure. That's that cookie. That's that ice cream. That's that extra bun. So in adulthood, it's like, I've had a rough day. I know I've got all these fitness goals, but I deserve that donut on the way home because I love it so much, and I love that food. Yeah, you do. I'm from South Louisiana. We love Cajun food. We love food. And when there's so much trauma in the community and a love for food, we're like either the first or second most obese state in the country. And there's that crossover there of how do I control my emotions? Well, with food. How do I control, let's say I might have experienced some kind of physical abuse or something. Well, if I was physically abused as a child, well, who doesn't get physically abused? Big, strong, Germanic barbarians, So the more I can juice up and get huge, be a huge bodybuilder, the less somebody can mess with me, you know. So we can develop these unhealthy views of how can I control myself and the environment by doing things to my body or with my body, and to or with food. So we can have all these very subconscious, but right under the surface, guidance that leads us in a very unhealthy directions in the fitness world. It's like the body is what experiences trauma, and so we develop this unhealthy relationship with our body. I hate my body. It's disgusting, and I'll exercise and make it. I'll abuse it. I'll work it out super hard. I'll starve it until it becomes something pretty enough for me to accept and maybe love someday. And we never get there, because you get, supermodels and, fitness perfectionists. They never get there because their brain is always looking for something because they need that unhealthy form of control. If they say, "Oh, I'm there," then what happens? So what do? We have to slow down and say, well, what is my drive in this way? Is this healthy or not healthy? Let's find some professionals. Is this nutrition plan, or is this physical plan breaking my body down, or is it building it up? Oftentimes it's so complex or confusing that it requires some professional assistance in the beginning. And sometimes we luck out. Like in the book I talk about this amazing woman, Eva Tordokin. She's like this Olympic skier, and just all around super tough chick, man. And she was one of the original CrossFit instructors when it was getting started. And my brother and I were out there training directly under her, and she was explaining, like, we have to practice the attitude part first. I have to love my body. And if I love my body like I love my kid or my niece or nephew, then I'm not going to feed them junk because I want them to be healthy. I want to treat them in a loving and respectful fashion. So I have to treat my body, but I have to practice loving myself so that I can treat it that way, even though I actually loathe myself or am disgusted by aspects of myself. So it's this discipline of practicing a self-loving and self-respecting attitude and behaviors until eventually it starts sinking in. And again, that takes years to develop. When I have this unhealthy relationship with my body, it takes years to self-brainwash in a positive way. And that's where things like seeking a professional to get it started, finding a fitness, a fitness coach, like a physical trainer, who's like one of those rah-rah, healthy messages kind of thing. So Eva used to, if you said something negative about yourself, you'd have to do 10 burpees or do a bunch of stuff she'd punish you for saying a self-hating thing, and then say, now say something wonderful about yourself, and we're going to treat our body in a loving fashion by feeding it wonderful nutrition. And what is wonderful nutrition? Well, we got to educate ourselves. Our parents didn't teach us what wonderful food is. My parents thought they were training us about what was great food, and they were following the old government pyramid, which was a terrible, terrible nutrition. So in adulthood, for highest performance, and it's not just to be kind of healthy. If you want to be the most healthy, it requires that you basically get a bachelor's degree in nutrition. Then you can love yourself and treat your body in a loving fashion, in a truly educated fashion, right? So it's a long process, right? But it starts with shifting.
Yeah, and I guess the challenge is that it's the reinforcement over the years. Like you said, it's the fact that someone has been subconsciously or even consciously hating on their body for so long that's become the narrative that they continue to tell themselves, and it becomes ultimately their identity to a degree as well, right? And unfortunately, most of these behaviors disguise themselves as advantages to the traumas that we went through, right? They're supposed to protect us, like you said, with the bodybuilder or even the overweight person who's like, well, if I was sexually abused when I'm younger, no one's going to abuse a huge bodybuilder or an overweight person, right? For example, because they're seen as less attractive, right? In societal terms, not anything that we're discussing on this podcast, but from a societal perspective, that's kind of the narrative that goes down, and it's advantageous because it means protection. So that's one of the biggest challenges as well, because it's protection, and everything I've done in my life up to this point is reinforced this to keep me safe. So now I need to take away the safety blanket and tap into the unknown.
The unknown of vulnerability, the unknown of being able to be present and be vulnerable and be embarrassed in a moment and recover quickly from it and continue to engage and recognize it's not the end of the world. It's not a life or death situation. Yeah, it's incredibly challenging. And I like that you summarize it, you call it the both sides of that. You know, oftentimes we think we're just going to be damaging to the body and like beat it up because we hate it. But sometimes there's just an over focus on being, I need to be perfect. I need to be absolutely beautiful. I need to be super cut and manly. I need to look like Brad Pitt before, you know, that Fight Club physique before anyone will love me. You know, like that. It's that kind of ultra focus on perfectionism instead of on just self-acceptance of our natural, wonderful imperfections, and being able to put those things aside to lose the thoughts about myself and engage in losing myself in another human being. We're so self-confident that we've done our fitness stuff, we've done our nutrition stuff, we feel accepting and appreciative of our bodies that allow us to do these wonderful athletic things or be with family. Once we've had that level of acceptance and gratitude, I can forget about myself and just lose myself in a wonderful conversation with you or with your significant other, you know?
Yeah, it's amazing. Like, there's a beautiful life on the other side of that, right? Yeah, exactly. And yeah, I'm just very curious to ask you a question now off the back of that. Is there any way in which we can catch this? Maybe if we're a parent right now, or if we plan to be in the future, like, how do we not mess our children up is probably the $1 million question.
Oh man, I think it's a constant process of slow down and pay attention. Rule number 4 is we must slow down to speed up. To get to our goals, we have to slow down and do a little research. Slow down, figure out. Parenting is a huge, there's been a push in like for example, overindulgent parenting is a big deal. This James Fogarty did a lot of great research on that, and just doing a little research on that and understanding the difference between overindulgent parenting, authoritarian versus authoritative, and mentor parenting. There's all these different styles. Well, just reading a little bit about it and understanding even just how to discipline a kid in a healthy fashion. Instead of it being an emotional response, we slow down and just come up with there's a little formula. Breathe, relax, pick a consequence. It doesn't need to be terrible, just a consequence, but it has to be a behavioral consequence, and then not just talking. A lot of parents try to talk their kid into being a great kid, but they have a hard time giving a little consequence. Oh, no, now you got to do the dishes because that was, or you have to do a little something. So it's a little bit of research goes a long way. So if we just slow down and enjoy learning, then that's the best chance we have of it. If that's a great question, they have so many wonderful books out there, and again, so much wonderful free video tutorials online of how do I co-parent in a healthy fashion? How do I parent in a healthy fashion? How do I research it, man? Breathe, slow down, and enjoy doing a little research. Parents, we get so caught up in the rat race and moving around, running, trying to drop the kids off at 5 different activities. It's difficult to take that time, slow down on your Sunday morning, and do a little research, slow down and chat with the...
And I suppose another aspect also is doing the work on yourself, right? Because I heard a quote some time ago saying that we were broken by a generation that never learned to heal. And I love that quote. I think it's fantastic. And that's ultimately going to be the cycle if no one stops to heal and break that cycle, right? So it's nice to read the parenting books, but if every time your kid disobeys you, you get triggered because of no one ever does what you say or whatever that might be, or whatever that trauma that pulls on, it's like, well, then you think, well, now I'm a bad parent because I read all these books and I can't apply it, etc., right? So I can imagine like a lot of self-work is there as well.
There's so many loops. There are so many loops in response to trauma. It's self-fulfilling prophecies. I get super angry, negative feedback. I get so angry, I fuss the kid. And fussing the kid every time, well, the kid learns emotional responses to negative stuff. And so then the kid has these behavioral problems, and then it makes me more frustrated. And then it's a bunch of loops that we get stuck in. I think of trauma as stuff as response to trauma, natural response to trauma is getting hopped up on steroids, super intense, and really sticky. There are all these negative feedback loops and self-fulfilling prophecies that keep us stuck there until you do the self-work, until you go in and see, this is how I kept creating my own problems or perpetuating my own problems. My belief that you're going to reject me leads me to do these behaviors. I'm paranoid and I call you out on it every day. And if I keep telling you for 5 years, you're just going to leave me today, you're just going to leave me, just going to leave me. After 5 years, they're like, fine, I'm leaving, because you're never going to get it. You refuse to keep on. It's these really rough loops. So until we do that work and see our own negative feedback loops and our own self-fulfilling prophecies, our own self-doubt or self-loathing, until we do that work, it's hard to be effective in teaching the kids healthy functioning, how to avoid those loops. It's really hard to teach them if you haven't learned how to apply it in your own life. It's next to impossible.
100%. No, exactly. Ernest, this has been a truly fascinating conversation, and I'm glad that you're going to continue specializing in this area, because I feel that there's so many fascinating insights to take away from it, and I trust that you're going to do many more podcasts and potentially write even more books, and I'm looking forward to seeing more of that. And to wrap up, I want to ask a couple of final questions, and the first one I have for you is, what impact do you want to have on the world with the work that you do?
Oh man, I would just love to. One of the chapters is called Secrets Destroy. In the darkness and in secrecy, these things are allowed to perpetuate. It's very uncomfortable to discuss sexual abuse and incest and all kinds of stuff like that. But once you get comfortable with it, then the information can get out. Then the people communicating with one another, to know that, to speak with another human being who these things happen to is a world apart from experiencing it in isolation. Once somebody says, that happened to me too, and I still see you, I still accept and love you, it's a world apart. It allows for the process of healing to begin. But without it, it just festers, it stays, and it gets handed down. So the impact I would like to have would be to assist with spreading the information and having it be a more comfortable conversation. Just having it more able for people to broach that subject, to speak to somebody about it, and to say, yeah, I am going to go and hire somebody or speak up to a friend or significant other about it. Let me go ahead and talk about it. That's what I would love to have, any type of impact on that, on the world, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure you're very much on your way to doing that and just continuing on that mission. And where is the best place for people to find you if they want to keep up with the work that you're doing, or if they want to read your book?
ErnestEllenderPhD.com. That's my main website. I hope to keep building that. And again, I'm on the front end of getting this all going as a new author, and trying to set up all this social media and all that. So I don't have a lot of that set up, but I do have ErnestEllenderPhD.com, and I think HealFromChildhood.com is my book website. And I'll soon be starting a YouTube channel to try to offer a lot of this information directly to people for free. We really want to be able to get him to access that information.
Amazing. I love it. We'll make sure that all of that is in the show notes below. And if the YouTube channel is ready by the time this goes live, we'll make sure that that's there as well. But Ernest, thank you so much for your time today. It's been a fascinating conversation.
Number one, thank you for giving me this opportunity. I really appreciate it. And number two, thank you for providing a podcast that enables your viewers to increasingly hear from people about these types of topics and increasingly educate themselves about how to treat their body and themselves in a more mature, educated, self-loving, self-respecting fashion. That's the kind of daily stuff that they can positively brainwash themselves to overwrite that old negative washing. So thank you for creating this type of podcast. It's just wonderful.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much. Yeah, I 100% would love to be a part of that positive brainwashing. So more of this to come. So yeah, thank you so much for the kind words. Thank you so much, Ernest.